Grand Auditorium of the United States Naval Operations Command was silent in the way only a room full of warriors could be silent. Not empty, not quiet, silent with the weight of ceremony, with the gravity of sacrifice acknowledged but never fully understood by those who hadn't bled for it. April 2019, Washington, D.C. Spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long rectangular shadows across rows of dress whites and navy blues. Every uniform was pressed to razor edges. Every brass button caught the light like small suns. 300 officers sat in perfect formation, shoulders back, chins level, eyes forward. This was a room that understood discipline, that respected tradition, that honored valor. At the front, on an elevated stage draped in crimson and gold, stood a small table. On that table rested a single medal in an open case, the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Only the Medal of Honor ranked higher. In the entire history of the United States Navy, fewer than 7,000 had been awarded. Today, number 7,043 would find its home. But the woman waiting to receive it looked like she wished she were anywhere else. Lieutenant Kira Ashford sat in the third row, ramrod straight, her dress blues immaculate, her face a mask of composure that would have impressed a statue. 28 years old, 5 feet 9 inches of lean muscle and controlled tension. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it could have been carved from wood. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance that no one else could see. She did not fidget. She did not scan the crowd. She did not acknowledge the occasional glance from fellow officers who knew her name, knew her story, or thought they did. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers spread, pressing down as if anchoring herself to the chair, as if without that pressure she might float away, or bolt. In the front row, Admiral Sterling Blackwell watched her with the quiet intensity of a man who had learned to read what others tried to hide. 68 years old, salt and pepper hair cropped military short, a face that had seen too much ocean, too much combat, too much loss. His chest bore 4 rows of ribbons, each one a story, each one a scar that didn't show on skin. Navy Cross with gold star, Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, Defense Distinguished Service Medal. They glittered under the lights, but his eyes remained on the woman in the third row. Something was wrong with her posture. Not incorrect, too correct. The kind of rigid control that came not from pride, but from pain. He had seen it before. Desert Storm, 1991. A young ensign who stood at attention during a medal ceremony 3 weeks after taking shrapnel to the spine. The kid never flinched, never wavered. Collapsed the moment he left the stage. Blackwell had been the one to catch him. This woman, this Lieutenant Ashford, had that same quality. The appearance of strength covering something broken underneath. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Everyone rose. Kira rose with them, but Blackwell noticed the half-second delay, the subtle shift of weight to her left side, the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. Then it was gone, smoothed away behind that mask of discipline. A Navy captain stepped to the microphone, his voice amplified and formal. He read from a prepared citation, the language carefully sanitized for public consumption. Words like extraordinary heroism and selfless courage floated through the air, abstract and insufficient. He spoke of a classified operation in Afghanistan. October 2017, a high-risk extraction under enemy fire. He mentioned casualties sustained, teammates saved, a mission completed against overwhelming odds. What he did not mention was the blood, the screaming, the moment when Lieutenant Kira Ashford had to choose between following orders to extract or staying to save a man who had taught her everything she knew about being a SEAL. He did not mention the 4 hours of sustained combat when intel had promised 20 minutes. He did not mention the bodies that came home in flag-draped coffins, because someone had lied about what waited in that Afghan compound. The citation was 3 paragraphs long. The truth would take hours to tell, and even then it would not be the whole truth. Kira's name was called. She stood. The room erupted in applause, a thunder of gloved hands striking together in synchronized rhythm. Heads turned. Cameras flashed from the back corners where the press had been corralled. She did not acknowledge any of it. She walked forward with the mechanical precision of a machine executing a programmed sequence. Left foot, right foot, up the steps, across the stage. Each movement identical, measured, perfect. Admiral Blackwell rose from his seat and moved to meet her at center stage. Up close he could see more. The slight hollowness beneath her cheekbones, the faint shadows under her eyes that makeup could not quite conceal. The way her uniform jacket, though perfectly tailored, seemed to hang on her frame as if she had lost weight recently and not bothered to have it adjusted. Their eyes met. Hers were gray, storm cloud gray, the color of the North Atlantic in winter. And in those eyes, Blackwell saw something that made his chest tighten. Not fear, not pride, not even the 1,000-yard stare of PTSD that he had learned to recognize in too many good sailors. What he saw was exhaustion, the bone-deep, soul-crushing weariness of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight for far too long and did not know how to set it down. She saluted, crisp, exact, textbook perfect. He returned it, then extended his hand. When she took it, he felt the strength in her grip, but he also felt the tremor, slight, almost imperceptible, the kind of involuntary shake that comes from nerve damage or chronic pain. Her palm was calloused in ways that spoke of countless hours on the range, in the field, gripping weapons and ropes in the edges of helicopter doors. But the grip itself was weaker than it should have been for a woman of her build and training. Something was very wrong. He lifted the Navy Cross from its case. The metal was heavy, bronze, a cross pate with an eagle, anchor, and sailing ship in the center. The ribbon was navy blue with a vertical white stripe. He pinned it carefully to her uniform, just above her other ribbons. She stood perfectly still, eyes forward, breathing shallow and controlled. The audience applauded again, louder now. A standing ovation. 300 officers on their feet, honoring one of their own. Flashbulbs popped. The Navy captain at the microphone smiled and gestured for silence, preparing to move to the next commendation. Blackwell leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Congratulations, Lieutenant." Her response was immediate, automatic. "Thank you, sir." No emotion, no inflection. The words of a subordinate responding to a superior officer because regulation demanded it. He wanted to ask more, wanted to pull her aside and demand to know what ghost she was wrestling. But this was not the place. This was ceremony. This was pageantry. This was the Navy's way of saying your sacrifice mattered without ever really examining what that sacrifice had cost. Kira stepped back, saluted again, and turned to walk off the stage. The applause followed her down the steps and back to her seat. She sat. The ceremony continued. Another name was called, another medal awarded. The machine of military tradition rolled forward, indifferent and eternal. But Admiral Sterling Blackwell did not watch the next recipient. His eyes remained on the woman in the third row. The woman who sat perfectly still, hands pressed to her thighs, staring at nothing. The woman who looked like she was attending her own funeral. He had read her file. Every page, every mission report, every psych evaluation. On paper, Lieutenant Kira Ashford was one of the finest SEAL operators of her generation. Top of her class at BUD/S, expert marksman, fluent in Pashto and Dari, 2 combat tours before the age of 27, 17 confirmed enemy kills, 3 Bronze Stars. The file painted a picture of a warrior, a leader, a woman who belonged on recruitment posters. But files could lie, or more accurately, they could tell the truth while leaving out everything that mattered. What the file mentioned only in passing was that Lieutenant Ashford had refused this medal. 18 months ago, when the citation first crossed her desk, she had sent it back to command via certified mail with a single handwritten note attached. I cannot accept glory for a mission built on lies. Command had buried that detail. They had pressured her, cajoled her, reminded her of duty and tradition and the importance of setting an example for the next generation of female warfighters. Eventually, she had relented, but Blackwell did not think she had changed her mind. He thought she had simply run out of strength to resist. The ceremony concluded an hour later. The audience dispersed in controlled waves, officers mingling, shaking hands, exchanging the kind of professional pleasantries that sounded genuine and meant nothing. Families clustered around their decorated sons and daughters, pride shining on their faces. Reporters hovered at the edges, waiting for sound bites and photo opportunities. Kira Ashford stood alone near the side exit, hands clasped behind her back, watching the crowd with the detached wariness of someone who no longer trusted in closed spaces or large groups. A few officers approached her, offering congratulations. She thanked them with the same flat courtesy she had given Blackwell. They did not linger. There was something in her stillness that discouraged conversation. Something that said, I am here, but I am not present. And if you push, I will break. Blackwell made his way through the crowd, nodding to colleagues, deflecting attempts at conversation. When he reached her, she straightened slightly, instinctively coming to attention. Lieutenant Ashford, he said, not a question, a statement, an acknowledgement. She turned, saluted. He returned it, then gestured toward the hallway behind her. Walk with me. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Hesitation, calculation, the brief assessment of whether this was a request or an order. Then it was gone, replaced by compliance. Yes, sir. They walked in silence down a long corridor lined with portraits, faces of admirals and captains who had served with distinction decades ago, some living, most dead. The hallway was empty. Their footsteps echoed on polished marble. Somewhere in the distance, voices and laughter faded as they moved deeper into the building, away from the ceremony, away from the performance. Blackwell stopped in front of a portrait of a submarine commander from the Cold War, a man with hard eyes and a set jaw who had spent months beneath the Arctic ice, hunting Soviet vessels that hunted him in return. The kind of service that earned no medals because no one could acknowledge it existed. You refused this medal once, Blackwell said, his voice even and conversational, as if commenting on the weather. Kira's posture remained rigid. I did, sir. Why accept it now? She did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the portraits, moving from face to face. Young men frozen in time, their service reduced to oil paint and brass plaques. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. Tired. I thought no one cared enough to ask why. Blackwell turned to face her fully. She was tall for a woman, nearly his height, but in that moment she looked small, diminished. I read your file, he said, but I know how files can lie. Her jaw tightened. They don't lie, sir. They just leave things out. What things? She met his eyes then, really met them, and what he saw there was not defiance or fear. It was something harder to define, a kind of exhausted honesty, the look of someone who had been drowning for so long that they no longer remembered what breathing felt like. The parts that matter, she said. He studied her for a long moment. Around them, the portraits watched in silent judgment. Finally, he spoke again. I authorized missions that got good sailors killed. Took me 30 years to admit that to myself. He paused. How long are you going to wait? Kira looked away. Her hands, still clasped behind her back, tightened until the knuckles went white. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Do you remember every name, every face? The question hit him like a physical blow. Because yes, he did. Every single one. 28 years, and he could still recite them. Ensign Matthews, Petty Officer Kowalski, Seaman Briggs, Lieutenant Commander Patterson. 8 men dead in the First Gulf War because he had trusted faulty intelligence and ordered them into a minefield that should not have been there. Their faces visited him some nights, not often anymore, but enough. Yes, he said simply. She nodded as if that confirmed something she already knew. Then you understand why I can't just pin on a medal and pretend it means what they say it means. What does it mean to you? That 3 people died for nothing, and I'm still here. The words were not spoken with self-pity. They were stated as fact, cold, clinical, the assessment of an operator analyzing mission failure. Blackwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. I want to understand, but I need you to help me understand. Kira's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or permission, or maybe just proof that he could handle what she was about to say. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because after a long silence, she spoke again. If you really want to know why I didn't want the medal, she paused, swallowed. You need to see what it actually cost. Show me. She looked over her shoulder, scanning the hallway. Empty. No witnesses, no cameras. Then she turned back to him and said something that made his breath catch. Not here. Come with me. She led him to a small briefing room at the end of the corridor, the kind of room used for classified discussions and private debriefings. Windowless, soundproofed, a table, 2 chairs, a whiteboard on one wall that had been wiped clean but still bore the ghost marks of previous operations. She opened the door with a key card, stepped inside, and waited for him to follow. When the door closed behind them, the silence was absolute. Kira stood at the far end of the table, her back to him, hands resting on the edge as if she needed the support. Her shoulders rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. Blackwell waited. He had interrogated enemy combatants and debriefed traumatized sailors. He knew when to push and when to let silence do the work. Finally, she spoke without turning around. I haven't been in this room since my debrief. October 2017. They asked me 3 questions, wrote down my answers, left. That was it. No follow-up, no investigation, just a file marked classified and a commendation I didn't ask for. What should they have asked you? Who authorized the mission? Why the intelligence was wrong? How Agent Callum Reed could have been dead for 9 days and we were still sent to extract him? Blackwell went very still. What did you just say? Kira turned around slowly. Her face was pale but composed. You heard me, sir. Reed was KIA 9 days before your mission? Yes, that's not in any report I've seen. No, it wouldn't be. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them like smoke. Blackwell's mind raced, connecting pieces that should not have fit together. A mission based on intelligence that was not just faulty, but impossible. A team sent into harm's way to rescue a man who was already dead. Casualties that could have been avoided if someone, anyone, had done their job. Or worse, if someone had deliberately chosen not to. How do you know this? He asked carefully. Because 6 months after the mission, someone sent me proof. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, classified markings, CIA letterhead, an autopsy summary, date of death, October 6, 2017. Cause, execution-style gunshot wound to the head, estimated time of death 8 to 10 days prior to body recovery. Blackwell took the paper, read it again. His hands, steady through 4 decades of service, began to shake. Who sent you this? I don't know. It came in an unmarked envelope, no return address. But whoever it was, they knew what happened. And they wanted me to know that someone else knew the truth. He looked up from the paper, his voice hard. Why didn't you report this? Kira's laugh was bitter and brief. To who? The people who signed off on the mission? The command structure that buried the debrief? I'm a lieutenant, Admiral. I don't have the rank or the connections to fight this. I had two choices: keep my mouth shut and accept the medal, or speak up and get labeled unstable, insubordinate, a problem that needs to be quietly retired. So you chose silence. I chose survival. She paused. Until today. What changed? She was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. Then she began unbuttoning her uniform jacket. Slowly, methodically. Blackwell tensed, confused, but she held up a hand. You asked what the medal cost, she said softly. I'm going to show you. She removed the jacket, folded it carefully, and set it on the table. Beneath, she wore a standard issue undershirt, navy blue, fitted. She gripped the hem, hesitated, then lifted it just high enough to expose her left side, from waist to just beneath her ribs. Admiral Sterling Blackwell had seen combat wounds. He had seen burns and shrapnel scars and the aftermath of IEDs. He had stood over hospital beds and looked at injuries that made strong men weep. But what he saw now made him step back involuntarily, his hand rising to his mouth. The scarring was extensive. Jagged lines of raised tissue, some white with age, some still faintly pink, crisscrossed her ribs like a roadmap of violence. But worse than the scars were the three distinct bulges beneath the skin. Small, irregular, unmistakable. Shrapnel, still embedded, still inside her. Kira lowered her shirt and met his eyes. They're too close to my heart. Removing them carries a 40% chance of fatal hemorrhage. So they stay. Every breath I take, I feel them. Every time I move wrong, they shift. On cold days, they ache. On bad days, they feel like they're still burning. Blackwell's voice came out hoarse. Jesus Christ. That's what it cost, Kira said quietly. That's what I live with. 3 pieces of an RPG that should have killed me, still inside my chest. Because someone sent my team into a firefight based on intelligence they knew was false. Corporal Brennan Walsh, 23 years old, killed instantly. Petty Officer Declan Foster, 26, engaged to be married, bled out on the medevac. Staff Sergeant Sloan Merrick, 29, my best friend, took a round through the liver, died in my arms 3 days later in Germany. She picked up her jacket and began buttoning it back on, her movements precise and controlled. So yes, sir, I refuse the medal. Because how do you accept congratulations for surviving something you were never supposed to walk into in the first place? The room was silent except for the faint hum of ventilation. Blackwell stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just learned. Not just the physical evidence of her injuries, but the implications, the conspiracy. Pinned that medal on me. I saw something. Pinned that medal on me. I saw something in your eyes. You weren't just going through the motions. You actually cared. And I'm tired, Admiral. I'm so tired of carrying this alone. So if there's even a chance you can help me find out who did this and why, then I'll take that chance, even if it destroys me. Blackwell was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his own jacket and pulled out a small card. His personal cell number. He handed it to her. Tomorrow morning, 0800, my office. We're going to find out exactly what happened to you and your team. And then we're going to make damn sure it never happens again. Kira took the card. For the first time since he had met her, something changed in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the absence of hopelessness. A small crack in the armor. Yes, sir. They left the briefing room together. The hallway was still empty. The ceremony had long since ended. Most of the building had cleared out, officers heading home to families and lives that did not include classified debriefs and buried truths. Kira Ashford walked alone to her car, the Navy Cross heavy on her chest, heavier than bronze had any right to be. She drove back to her apartment in silence, parked, and sat in the darkness for 20 minutes before she could make herself go inside. That night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror and lifted her shirt again, studying the scars in the harsh fluorescent light. 3 bumps beneath the skin, Walsh, Foster, Merrick. The names played on loop in her mind, a rosary of the dead. She pressed her fingers gently against the largest fragment, the one closest to her heart. It shifted slightly beneath the pressure. A foreign object that would never belong, could never be integrated, would always be separate and wrong. But for the first time in 18 months, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, their deaths would not be meaningless forever. In his quarters across the city, Admiral Sterling Blackwell sat at his desk with the autopsy report in front of him and a glass of scotch he had not touched. The classified marking on the paper seemed to glow in the lamplight. Date of death, October 6th, 2017. 9 days. They had known for 9 days. He picked up his phone and began making calls, quietly, carefully, to people he trusted, people who owed him favors, people who understood that sometimes the enemy wore the same uniform you did. By midnight, he had confirmed what he suspected. The mission had been authorized through back channels. The intelligence had been marked questionable by 3 separate analysts. And the officer who had signed off on sending Lieutenant Kira Ashford and her team into that Afghan compound was now a Rear Admiral working in Navy intelligence at the Pentagon, a man named Vincent Hale. Blackwell looked at the name on his screen for a long time. Then he opened a new file and began to type. This would not be quick. It would not be easy, but it would be thorough. Because 30 years ago, he had failed 8 men by trusting the wrong people. He would not fail this woman the same way. The clock on his desk read 01:30 when he finally stopped typing. His first draft was 17 pages long, a formal request to reopen the investigation into Operation Nightshade, supporting evidence, timeline discrepancies, a list of witnesses to be interviewed. He saved the document, encrypted it, and sent a copy to 3 people he knew would not ignore it. Then he poured the scotch down the sink, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Sleep did not come easily. It rarely did anymore. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe the insomnia was worth something. Across the city, Lieutenant Kira Ashford lay in the darkness, her hand resting over the scars on her ribs, feeling the steady thump of her heart against the metal fragments that had tried to stop it. Tomorrow, she would walk into an admiral's office and begin the process of tearing down the lie that had killed her friends. Tonight, she allowed herself to remember them as they had been. Not dead, not statistics, not casualties of war, just people. Her people, worth fighting for, worth telling the truth for, even if that truth burned everything else to the ground. The morning came cold and gray, the kind of Washington dawn that felt more like dusk. Kira Ashford stood outside the Naval Operations Command Building at 07:45, 15 minutes early as training dictated, watching her breath form clouds in the April air. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sloan Merrick's face in those final moments, blood on her lips, trying to speak but only managing a wet gurgle that meant her lung had collapsed. The memory was 2 years old. It felt like yesterday. She touched her ribs through her uniform jacket. The shrapnel fragments were quiet this morning, just dull pressure, a reminder that she carried pieces of that night everywhere she went. Some scars you could hide, some you wore on the inside. Both kinds never stopped aching. At 07:55, she entered the building, cleared security, and made her way to Admiral Blackwell's office on the 4th floor. The door was already open. He sat behind a massive oak desk covered in file folders, a laptop, and 3 separate phones. The walls were decorated with photographs from decades of service. A young Blackwell on the deck of a submarine, an older Blackwell shaking hands with the president, Desert Storm, Bosnia, Afghanistan, a lifetime of wars, each one leaving its mark. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them darker than it had been yesterday. He had not slept either. "Lieutenant Ashford, close the door." She did. The click of the latch felt final, like sealing a tomb. Sit. She sat in the chair across from him, back straight, hands on her knees. He studied her for a moment, then pushed a thick folder across the desk. I spent the night going through every file I could access on Operation Nightshade. Official reports, intelligence summaries, communication logs. He paused. What I found doesn't match what you told me. Kira's jaw tightened. Sir, He held up a hand. I'm not saying you lied. I'm saying the official record is incomplete, deliberately so. He opened the folder and pulled out a document marked with red classification stamps. This is the original mission brief, filed October 14th, 2017, 24 hours before your team deployed. It lists Agent Callum Reed as an active asset requiring immediate extraction. High-value target, time-sensitive operation. He set it aside and pulled out another document. This is an internal CIA communication, also dated October 14th. It references Reed as deceased, status confirmed, body recovered October 7th. He looked up. Someone in the chain of command had both pieces of information. They chose to act on only one of them. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. Hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that suspicion never could. Who signed off on the mission? Blackwell pulled out a third document. Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hale, Navy Intelligence Liaison to Special Activities Center. He received the CIA communication at 1600 hours on October 14th. Your mission brief was issued at 2100 hours the same day, 5 hours later. He knew Reed was dead and sent us anyway. It appears so, but knowing and proving are different things. We need more. Kira leaned forward. What else is in those files? Blackwell's expression darkened. Enough to raise questions, not enough to bring charges. Yet, he pulled out a financial document. 3 months before your mission, Hale received a payment of $195,000 from a consulting firm called Meridian Strategic Solutions. On paper, it was payment for a white paper on intelligence integration. But Meridian is a subsidiary of Helix Defense Systems. The name meant nothing to Kira. Blackwell saw her confusion and explained, Helix Defense specializes in autonomous surveillance technology, drones, AI-guided targeting systems. They had a $420 million contract with DoD to develop next-generation battlefield awareness platforms. But the technology was unproven. It needed real-world testing, combat conditions, live targets. The pieces began to connect in Kira's mind, forming a picture so ugly she almost could not look at it. You think they used my team as a test? I think your team's movements were being tracked in real time. I think someone wanted to see how well their AI could predict human behavior under fire. And I think they chose a mission where the outcome didn't matter because the asset was already dead. His voice dropped. You were lab rats, Lieutenant, and the people running the experiment didn't care if you survived. Kira stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, staring out at the city without seeing it. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. Walsh was 23 years old. He asked me right before we boarded the heli if it would always be this scary. I told him fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. She turned back to Blackwell. He died 30 seconds after we hit the ground. Sniper round through the temple. He never had a chance to be scared. Blackwell let the silence sit for a moment, then spoke quietly. I need you to be smart about this, Lieutenant, not just angry. What we're talking about is conspiracy, negligent homicide at minimum. Maybe worse. It's also the kind of thing that gets buried if we're not careful. Hale is a rear admiral now. He has friends, resources. The moment he knows we're looking at him, he'll circle the wagons. What do you suggest? I've already requested a meeting with Colonel Judith Crane, JAG Corps. She's someone I trust. Served with her in the Balkans. If anyone can navigate the legal maze on this, it's her. He checked his watch. She'll be here at 0900. Until then, I want you to write down everything Every detail you remember about that night. Times, coordinates, radio traffic, anything that might contradict the official story. Kira nodded. I can do that. One more thing. Blackwell's tone shifted, became almost gentle. This is going to get harder before it gets better. People are going to push back. They're going to question your motives, your mental state, your credibility. They're going to try to make you the problem instead of the corruption you're exposing. Are you prepared for that? She met his eyes. I've been living with 3 pieces of shrapnel in my chest for 2 years because removing them might kill me. I think I can handle some bureaucrats questioning my credibility. A faint smile crossed Blackwell's face. Good, then let's get to work. For the next 90 minutes, Kira wrote, the helicopter insertion at 0230. The GPS coordinates, 31. 5 degrees north, 64.8 degrees east. The promised intel of 8 to 12 hostiles. The reality of over 40 combatants with RPGs and coordinated fields of fire. Walsh's death at 0232. Foster taking shrapnel at 0235. The 4-hour running firefight through terrain that the enemy knew and they did not. Finding Reed's GPS beacon transmitting from a radio on a loop. Merrick taking a round through the liver at 0415. The decision to stay for Stone. The RPG blast at 0540. The extraction at 0610. She wrote until her hand cramped. Until the memories became so vivid she could smell the cordite and blood. Until she had to stop and press her palm against her ribs to remind herself she was here. In an office in Washington, not back in that Afghan compound watching her friends die. Colonel Judith Crane arrived at 0900 exactly. She was a tall woman with steel gray hair cut short and sharp features that suggested she did not suffer fools. 58 years old, 34 years of service. She carried a leather briefcase and wore her uniform with the kind of casual authority that came from decades of walking into rooms and immediately becoming the person in charge. Blackwell made introductions. Crane shook Kira's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. Admiral Blackwell speaks highly of you, Lieutenant. He also tells me you have evidence of gross misconduct in your chain of command. Yes, ma'am. Show me. For the next 2 hours, Kira laid it out. The mission brief, the ambush, the casualties, the autopsy report that proved Reed had been dead for 9 days. Her own injuries, the shrapnel still lodged in her ribs. She pulled up her shirt again, showing the scars to yet another officer, feeling the humiliation and anger that came with putting her trauma on display like evidence in a trial. Crane studied the scars with clinical detachment, then made notes in a leather-bound journal. When Kira finished, Crane sat back and steepled her fingers. This is actionable, but it's also circumstantial. We have documents that show Hale received contradictory intelligence. We have financial records that suggest a conflict of interest. What we don't have is proof of intent. A good defense attorney will argue incompetence, not malice. Communication breakdown, bureaucratic failure. They'll say Hale made a mistake, not a crime. Kira felt her frustration rise. 3 people are dead because of his mistake. I agree. But the law requires more than moral certainty. It requires evidence of criminal intent. Crane looked at Blackwell. We need someone on the inside, someone who was part of the planning or execution, who's willing to talk. I may have a lead on that. Blackwell pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages. I put out some quiet feelers last night. One response came from a CIA analyst named Eleanor Webb. She was part of the mission planning team for Operation Nightshade. Left the agency 6 months after your mission. No disciplinary action, just resigned and walked away. That kind of departure usually means someone's conscience caught up with them. Crane nodded. Can you get her to talk? I can try. 3 days later, Kira found herself sitting in a coffee shop in Arlington, Virginia, across from a woman who looked like she had aged a decade in 2 years. Eleanor Webb was 42, according to her file, but she could have passed for 50. Dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled slightly when she lifted her coffee cup. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, but something in her posture still screamed government work. The way she sat with her back to the wall, the way her eyes tracked every person who entered the shop. "Thank you for meeting with me," Kira said. Webb stared into her coffee. "I almost didn't come. I told myself I was done with all of this, that walking away was enough. But you did come. Because I've spent 2 years trying to forget what happened, and I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the mission brief I helped write, the one that sent you into that compound." She looked up, her eyes haunted. "I knew something was wrong. The intelligence was too clean, too convenient. And then when the after-action reports came in and I saw the casualty list, I started digging. That's when I found out Reed had been dead for over a week." Kira kept her voice level, controlled. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did. To my supervisor. He told me to drop it, said it was need to know, and I didn't need to know. When I pushed, he reminded me about my security clearance, my pension, how much I had to lose, so I quit. I thought if I wasn't part of the system anymore, I wouldn't feel complicit." She laughed bitterly. "That worked about as well as you'd expect. You sent me the autopsy report, 6 months after the mission." Webb nodded. "Anonymous, untraceable. I thought if someone knew the truth, maybe they'd do something about it. But nothing happened. The Navy gave you a medal and called it a win. I figured that was the end of it." "It's not the end." Kira leaned forward. "Admiral Blackwell is reopening the investigation. But we need testimony from someone who was inside the planning process. Someone who can confirm that people knew Reed was dead and sent us anyway." Webb's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "If I testify, I'll be destroyed. They'll come after my pension, my reputation, everything. 3 people died because of what they did. 2 of them were younger than me. One of them was my best friend. She died in my arms, asking me to tell her mother she loved her." Kira's voice remained steady, but her eyes were hard. "So yes, testifying will cost you, but staying silent costs more." Webb was quiet for a long time. Outside, traffic moved past in an endless stream. The coffee shop hummed with conversation and the hiss of espresso machines. Normal life, continuing as if the world was not built on lies and buried bodies. Finally, Webb spoke. "There's more. Things I didn't put in that report because I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Tell me, Hale wasn't working alone. There were 3 other officers involved, Navy, CIA, one from JSOC. They were part of something called Project Coldwater, a joint initiative between DoD and defense contractors to develop AI-powered combat support systems. Your mission wasn't the first test. There were 2 others, Somalia in 2016, Yemen in early 2017. Both had similar patterns, high-risk operations based on questionable intelligence, multiple casualties, and in both cases, Helix defense drones were in the area, recording everything. Kira felt ice in her veins. How many people died in those missions? Somalia, 4. Yemen, 3. 7 total before your mission, 10 if you count yours. Webb pulled out a flash drive and set it on the table. I copied everything before I left. Communications, financial records, mission briefs, all of it. I've been carrying it around for 2 years, too afraid to use it and too guilty to destroy it. Kira took the flash drive. It was small and black and weighed almost nothing. 10 lives reduced to a few gigabytes of data. There's one more thing you should know, Webb said. Project Coldwater isn't finished. I saw planning documents for 11 more test missions. I don't know if they're still active or if they were canceled after your mission got media attention. But if they're still running those tests, more people are going to die. That night, Kira sat in Admiral Blackwell's office with the flash drive on the desk between them. Colonel Crane stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression grim. They had spent 3 hours going through the files. With each new document, the scope of the conspiracy became clearer and more horrifying. "This is bigger than I thought," Blackwell said quietly. "This isn't one corrupt officer. This is systematic, institutional. They turned combat operations into product testing and didn't care who died in the process." Crane picked up a printout. "These financial records show payments to 4 different officers over a 3-year period. Total disbursements of over $1.2 million, all from shell companies connected to Helix Defense." She looked at Kira. "This is enough to bring charges. Conspiracy, fraud, negligent homicide, maybe manslaughter depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be." "How long until we can move on this?" Kira asked. "That's the complication." Crane set down the printout. "The moment we file formal charges, this becomes public. Defense attorneys, media, congressional oversight, it will be a circus. And in that circus, you're going to be the star witness. Every detail of your life will be examined. Your service record, your mental health evaluations, your relationships. They're going to try to destroy your credibility in every way possible." "Let them try." Blackwell leaned back in his chair. "There's another factor. One of the officers implicated in these files is currently serving as Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. If we move on this through official channels, he'll know about it before the ink dries on the paperwork. He'll have time to destroy evidence, coordinate stories, maybe even disappear witnesses." "So what do we do?" Crane and Blackwell exchanged a look. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the kind that came from years of working in the shadows of military bureaucracy. "We go public first," Crane said. "Not through the Navy, through the press. We give everything to a journalist with the credibility and the platform to break this story so big that they can't bury it. Once it's in the public eye, they'll have no choice but to investigate, and they'll have to do it transparently." Kira understood immediately. "You want me to talk to the media?" "Not just talk. Tell your story. Show them your scars. Make them see you as a person, not a statistic. Make it impossible for the public to look away." Blackwell's voice was gentle, but firm. "I won't lie to you, Lieutenant. This will end your military career. The Navy doesn't reward whistleblowers, even when they're right, especially when they're right." "My career ended the moment that shrapnel hit my ribs," Kira said. "I'm just making it official." 2 days later, Catherine Strand of 60 Minutes sat across from Kira in a television studio, cameras rolling, lights bright enough to make her eyes water. Strand was 52, a veteran journalist with 2 Peabody Awards and a reputation for taking down powerful people who thought they were untouchable. Her questions were direct, unflinching, designed to get at the truth beneath the official story. "Lieutenant Ashford, you were awarded the Navy Cross for your actions during Operation Nightshade, but you refused that medal for 18 months. Why?" Kira looked directly into the camera. "Because I couldn't accept congratulations for surviving a mission that should never have happened." "What do you mean?" "The man we were sent to rescue, CIA operative Callum Reed, was already dead. He'd been executed 9 days before my team deployed. Someone in command knew that. They sent us anyway." Strand leaned forward. "That's a serious allegation. Do you have proof?" Kira pulled out the autopsy report and held it up. "This is Agent Reed's autopsy. Date of death, October 6th, 2017. My team deployed on October 15th. The math isn't complicated. Why would anyone send a SEAL team on a rescue mission for someone already dead? Because they weren't testing the mission. They were testing us. Our movements were being tracked by AI surveillance drones. The entire operation was a live combat simulation for technology being developed by a defense contractor called Helix Defense Systems. My team was the control group, and when 3 of us died, that was just data." The studio was silent except for the quiet whir of cameras. Strand let the moment breathe, then asked the question that would define everything that followed. "Lieutenant, these are extraordinary claims. Are you prepared for the consequences of making them publicly?" Kira stood slowly. She unbuttoned her uniform jacket, set it aside, and lifted her undershirt to expose the scarred landscape of her ribs. The camera zoomed in. Millions of people would see this. The jagged tissue, the three distinct bulges where shrapnel remained embedded. "These are the consequences," Kira said quietly. "Three pieces of an RPG that tried to kill me and couldn't be removed without killing me. I carry them every day, every breath, every heartbeat." She pointed to each bulge in turn. "This one is for Corporal Brennan Walsh, 23 years old. This one is for Petty Officer Declan Foster, 26, engaged to be married. This one is for Staff Sergeant Sloan Merrick, my best friend. She died asking me to tell her mother she loved her." She lowered her shirt and looked into the camera. "So yes, I'm prepared for the consequences. Because the alternative is staying silent while more people die for someone's profit margin. And I can't do that. I won't." The camera held on her face for a long moment. Then Strand turned to the second camera. "Also joining us is Rear Admiral Sterling Blackwell, who has been investigating these allegations. Admiral, what have you found?" Blackwell sat beside Kira, his uniform perfect, his medals gleaming. But his voice carried the weight of every year he had served, every mistake he had made, every sailor he had lost. "I found evidence of systematic corruption spanning 3 years in multiple combat operations. At least 10 American service members died in missions that were compromised by the same conspiracy that sent Lieutenant Ashford's team into an ambush. Officers in the Navy, CIA, and Joint Special Operations Command received over $1.2 million from defense contractors in exchange for facilitating live combat tests of surveillance technology." Strand's eyes widened. "You're saying this goes beyond one mission?" "I'm saying this is how we got here. When we turn soldiers into product demonstrations, when we prioritize contracts over lives, when we bury the truth because it's inconvenient." He paused. "I'm also saying we're going to fix it, because Lieutenant Ashford is right. Silence has a cost, and it's too damn high." "One more question, Admiral. You have terminal lung cancer. You've been given less than a year to live. Why risk your legacy on this?" Blackwell smiled, sad and weary. "Because I spent 28 years carrying the guilt of sailors I lost to bad intelligence and corrupt decision-making. If I can spend my last months making sure it doesn't happen to someone else, that's not risking my legacy. That's finally earning one." The interview aired 3 days later. Within 4 hours, it was trending #1 on every social media platform. Within 8 hours, the Pentagon issued a statement announcing a full investigation. Within 24 hours, Rear Admiral Vincent Hale was placed on administrative leave. By the end of the week, 4 officers had been suspended. Helix Defense's stock had plummeted 40%, and Congress had announced hearings. But that same week, Kira's apartment was broken into. She came home to find the door ajar, the lock forced. Nothing was taken. Her television was still there, her laptop, her jewelry. But when she checked the small display case on her dresser, her blood went cold. The case was empty. Inside, she had kept 3 small metal fragments, shrapnel removed from Sloan Merrick's body during the autopsy. Kira had requested them, been given them, kept them as a reminder of what had been lost. They were all she had left of her best friend, besides memories and guilt. Now they were gone. On her kitchen table, she found a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just 8 words typed in capital letters. "Heroes who ask questions become tragedies." Kira called Blackwell immediately. He arrived with Colonel Crane and 2 NCIS agents within the hour. They dusted for prints, found none. They checked security cameras, found nothing. Whoever had done this was professional, careful, someone with training and resources. "This is intimidation," Crane said. "They're showing you they can reach you anytime they want." "Let them come," Kira said flatly. "I'm not stopping." But Blackwell saw the fear beneath her bravado. The way her hand kept drifting to her ribs. The way she checked the windows every few minutes. He pulled her aside while the NCIS agents worked. "I'm assigning you protective detail. No arguments. I don't need, yes, you do, because you're right and they know it. And when people with power are cornered, they get dangerous." His voice dropped. "I've seen this before. Good people who spoke up and ended up dead in accidents that weren't accidents. I won't let that happen to you." Kira wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself. But the truth was, she was afraid. Not of dying. She had made peace with that possibility a long time ago. But she was afraid of dying before the truth came out. Before Hale and the others faced justice. Before Walsh and Foster and Merrick's deaths meant something. "Okay," she said quietly. "Protective detail." That night, with 2 armed Marines stationed outside her apartment, Kira lay in bed and thought about the stolen shrapnel. Those fragments had been more than keepsakes. They had been proof, physical evidence that Sloan had died, that the mission had been real, that the pain was not just in her head. Now they were gone, taken by people who wanted to erase the past, to turn her story into something questionable, something that could be dismissed. But they had made a mistake, because Kira still carried her own shrapnel, 3 pieces that could not be stolen. 3 pieces that would testify louder than any words. She pressed her hand to her ribs and felt them shift beneath her skin. Walsh, Foster, Merrick. "I won't let them erase you," she whispered to the darkness. "I promise." Across the city, in a secure facility, Admiral Sterling Blackwell sat in front of his computer and composed an email. It would go to the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Director of the CIA, and 12 senators on the Armed Services Committee. The subject line read, "Project Coldwater, Full Disclosure." The body of the email was 17 pages long. Names, dates, financial records, mission summaries. Everything Eleanor Webb had provided, everything he and Crane had confirmed. He attached the 60 Minutes interview. He attached photographs of Kira's scars. He attached the autopsy report for Callum Reed. And at the bottom, he wrote one final paragraph. "I am a dying man. I have no career left to protect, no ambition left to pursue. What I have is a responsibility to the men and women who served under me, to the sailors who trusted me to keep them safe and whom I failed. I will not fail Lieutenant Kira Ashford the same way. This corruption will be exposed. These officers will be held accountable. Or I will spend every day I have left making sure the entire world knows what you tried to bury." He signed it with his full rank and title. Then he hit send. The replies began arriving within the hour, some angry, some defensive, some promising action. But the message was clear. The story was out. The truth was spreading. And there was no putting it back in the box. The military tribunal convened on a humid morning in August 2019, 3 months after the 60 Minutes interview had detonated across the nation like a bomb. The hearing room at the Washington Navy Yard was packed beyond capacity. Journalists crammed into every available seat, cameras lined the back wall, and outside veterans groups had gathered with signs demanding justice. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of too many bodies in too small a space, and the tension was thick enough to cut. Kira Ashford sat at the prosecution table in her dress whites, flanked by Colonel Judith Crane and 2 JAG attorneys she barely knew. Across the aisle, Rear Admiral Vincent Hale sat with a team of 5 defense lawyers, all in expensive suits that probably cost more than Kira made in 6 months. Hale looked older than his 52 years. The past 3 months had carved lines into his face, but his posture remained rigid, defiant. A man who believed he had done nothing wrong, or at least nothing he would be punished for. The presiding officer was a 3-star admiral named Thomas Garrett, no relation to her former senior chief. 64 years old, silver hair, a face that revealed nothing. He had served in both Iraq wars and had a reputation for being fair but ruthless. The kind of officer who followed the law to the letter, even when the letter cut deep. Garrett brought his gavel down. The murmur of conversation died instantly. This tribunal is convened to hear evidence regarding charges brought against Rear Admiral Vincent Hale: conspiracy to commit fraud, negligent homicide, conduct unbecoming an officer. The accused will rise. Hale stood. His lead attorney, a civilian named Marcus Webb with silver temples in a $2,000 suit, stood beside him. How does the accused plead? Not guilty to all charges, sir. Hale's voice was steady, almost bored. Very well. Prosecution may present its opening statement. Colonel Crane rose. She walked to the center of the room, her movement deliberate, controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner. This case is about betrayal, the betrayal of trust, of duty, of the most fundamental obligation any officer has to the men and women under their command. She turned to face Hale directly. The evidence will show that Rear Admiral Hale, along with 3 other officers, conspired with defense contractors to use American service members as test subjects for unproven surveillance technology. They fabricated intelligence. They authorized missions they knew were compromised. And when those missions resulted in American deaths, they covered it up. She walked to the evidence table and picked up a document. On October 15, 2017, Lieutenant Kira Ashford led a 6-person SEAL team into Helmand Province, Afghanistan, to extract a CIA operative named Callum Reed. They were told the mission was time-sensitive, that Reed was in immediate danger, that resistance would be minimal. She set down the document and picked up another. This is Reed's autopsy report. It shows he was executed on October 6th, 9 days before Lieutenant Ashford's team deployed. Admiral Hale received this report at 1600 hours on October 14th. 5 hours later, he authorized the mission anyway. The room erupted in whispers. Garrett's gavel cracked down. Silence! Crane continued. 3 Americans died in the resulting ambush. Corporal Brennan Walsh, Petty Officer Declan Foster, Staff Sergeant Sloan Merrick. They died because Admiral Hale and his co-conspirators needed live combat data for artificial intelligence systems being developed by Helix Defense Systems, a company that paid Admiral Hale $195,000 3 months before this mission. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. The defense will tell you this was a mistake, a communication breakdown. They will say war is unpredictable and casualties are inevitable. But the evidence will prove this was deliberate, calculated, murder dressed up as operational necessity. She returned to her seat. The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett turned to the defense. Mr. Webb, your opening statement. The civilian attorney stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. His smile was professional, sympathetic. The smile of a man who had convinced juries to acquit the guilty 100 times before. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a tragedy compounded by a witch hunt. Yes, 3 brave Americans died during Operation Nightshade. That is a loss we all mourn. But combat is chaos. Intelligence is imperfect. Decisions are made with incomplete information under impossible pressure. He gestured to Hale. Admiral Hale is a decorated officer with 28 years of exemplary service. He has served in every major conflict since Desert Storm. He has earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Legion of Merit. And now, because a mission went wrong, because the fog of war obscured the truth, he is being accused of murder. Webb picked up his own document. The prosecution claims Admiral Hale received Agent Reed's autopsy report before authorizing the mission. What they don't tell you is that Admiral Hale received 17 intelligence reports that day. He was managing 6 active operations across 4 countries. In that context, is it reasonable to expect perfect recall of every detail? Or is it more likely that a tragic oversight occurred? He walked toward the gallery, his voice rising with conviction. The consulting fee from Helix Defense was for legitimate analytical work. Admiral Hale provided strategic insights on battlefield integration of new technologies. That is not conspiracy, that is his job. As for the accusation that American service members were used as test subjects, there is no evidence of that. What we have is correlation presented as causation. The fact that surveillance drones were present in the area does not prove they were there to observe Lieutenant Ashford's team specifically. Webb turned back to Hale. The prosecution wants you to believe that this distinguished officer willingly sent Americans to their deaths for money. I ask you to consider an alternative, that mistakes were made, that in the fog of war, tragedy occurred, and that the real injustice would be destroying a good man's life and legacy based on circumstantial evidence and emotional appeals. He sat down. The room remained silent, but now it was a different kind of silence. Uncertain. Divided. Garrett looked to Crane. Call your first witness. The prosecution calls Lieutenant Kira Ashford. Kira stood and walked to the witness stand. Her uniform was perfect. Her posture was military precise, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Crane approached, her expression gentle but professional. Lieutenant Ashford, please describe the events of October 15th, 2017. Kira took a breath. She had rehearsed this a dozen times, had written it down, had spoken it to therapists and investigators and journalists. But saying it here, under oath, with Hale watching from 10 feet away, was different. This was where it mattered. This was where justice would be decided. At 2300 hours on October 14th, my team received mission orders. Extract Agent Callum Reed from a compound in Helmand Province. Intel indicated 8 to 12 hostile combatants. Minimal resistance expected. In and out in 20 minutes. Her voice was steady, clinical. We inserted via helicopter at 0230 on October 15th. Within 90 seconds of hitting the ground, we were engaged from 3 sides by over 40 combatants with RPGs, automatic weapons, and what appeared to be pre-positioned explosives. What happened next? Corporal Walsh was killed immediately, sniper round to the head. Petty Officer Foster took shrapnel to his left arm, severed the brachial artery. Staff Sergeant Merrick and I provided covering fire, while our medic, Sergeant Pierce, tried to stabilize Foster. But the volume of fire was too intense. We had to move. Did you locate Agent Reed? We reached the coordinates where his tracker was transmitting. There was no person there, just a radio broadcasting his signal on a loop. Kira's jaw tightened. That's when I knew we'd been set up. What did you do? Senior Chief Stone was pinned down by a sniper approximately 200 meters from our position. I ordered Pierce to get Foster and Merrick to the extraction point. I stayed to provide cover for Stone. You stayed alone against 40 hostiles? Yes, ma'am. Why? For the first time, Kira's voice wavered. Because he was my responsibility. Because we don't leave our people behind. Because that's what SEALs do. Crane nodded. What happened during that time? I engaged targets for approximately 90 minutes. Expended 8 magazines. Then an RPG hit my position. I was thrown approximately 15 feet. Sustained 4 fractured ribs and multiple shrapnel wounds, including penetration of my left lung. She paused. I regained consciousness and dragged Senior Chief Stone to the extraction point. We were the last 2 to board the helicopter. You suffered life-threatening injuries but continued to fight. I had a job to do. Crane walked back to the evidence table. Let the records show that Lieutenant Ashford was subsequently diagnosed with 4 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and 7 shrapnel fragments, 3 of which remain embedded near her heart because surgical removal carries a 40% mortality risk. She turned back to Kira. Lieutenant, do you believe this mission should have been authorized? No, ma'am. Why not? Because Agent Reed was already dead. Because someone knew he was dead. And because 3 of my teammates died for no reason except to generate data for a weapons contractor. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection, speculation. Garrett looked at Kira. Does the witness have evidence to support this claim? Yes, sir. Kira reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded document. 6 months after the mission, I received this anonymously. Agent Reed's autopsy, showing he died on October 6th, 9 days before my team deployed. Crane took the document and entered it as evidence. Who do you believe sent this to you? I didn't know at the time, but I later learned it was CIA analyst Eleanor Webb. She had been part of the mission planning team and quit in protest when she realized what had happened. And what had happened in your assessment? Kira looked directly at Hale. We were sent into an ambush so that Helix Defense could test their surveillance AI on live targets. My team's movements, our tactics, our responses under fire, all of it was being recorded and analyzed in real time. We weren't a rescue mission, we were a field trial. The defense attorney stood again. Objection. The witness is not qualified to assess the strategic purpose of the mission. Overruled, Garrett said. The witness is testifying to her experience and conclusions based on evidence she received. Continue, Lieutenant. Kira's hands gripped the edges of the witness stand. Corporal Walsh was 23 years old. He asked me before we deployed if it would always be this scary. I told him, fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Her voice cracked. He was dead 90 seconds later. Petty Officer Foster bled out on the medevac helicopter. He was supposed to get married in December, and Staff Sergeant Merrick, she stopped, swallowed hard. Sloane Merrick was my best friend. She died in my arms in a hospital in Germany 3 days after the mission. Her last words were asking me to tell her mother she loved her. Tears ran down Kira's face now, but she did not wipe them away. So when you ask me if I believe this mission should have been authorized, the answer is no, absolutely not. Because 3 people I cared about are dead, and the man who sent us there knew they would be. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone in the gallery quietly crying. Crane let the moment breathe. Then she asked her final question. Lieutenant Ashford, why are you here today? Kira looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the veterans holding photos of Walsh and Foster and Merrick. Because silence has a cost, and I'm done paying it. The cross-examination was brutal. The defense attorney tried everything. He questioned Kira's memory, suggested PTSD had distorted her recollection, implied she had fabricated evidence to justify her own failures as a team leader. He brought up her refusal of the medal, suggested it indicated mental instability. He asked if she was seeking attention, a book deal, a movie contract. Kira answered every question with the same steady calm. No, sir. That's incorrect, sir. I stand by my testimony, sir. Finally, the attorney played his final card. Lieutenant Ashford, isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against Admiral Hale because he gave you negative performance reviews early in your career? Kira blinked. That's not true. Admiral Hale and I never served together before this mission. But he was on the promotion board that initially passed you over for lieutenant. I was not aware of that. So you had reason to resent him. I resent him because 3 of my teammates are dead because of decisions he made, not because of any promotion board. The attorney smiled. No further questions. Crane stood for redirect. Like Lieutenant, the defense suggests your testimony is motivated by personal animosity. Is that accurate? No, ma'am. What motivates your testimony? Kira's voice was quiet but firm. The truth, and the hope that if we expose what happened, it won't happen again. Thank you, Lieutenant. No further questions. Over the next 3 days, the prosecution called witness after witness. Eleanor Webb testified about the intelligence reports that showed Reed was dead. She brought documents, emails, audio recordings of conversations where officers discussed using SEAL teams as test platforms. Her testimony was devastating, precise, impossible to refute. Senior Chief Garrett Stone testified about the ambush, the way the enemy had known exactly where they would land, the precision of the attack, the feeling that they had walked into a trap. He broke down when describing how Kira had stayed behind to save him, knowing it would probably kill her. A financial analyst from the FBI testified about the payments from Helix Defense to Hale and 3 other officers. Over $1.2 million over 3 years, funneled through shell companies and consulting contracts that produced no actual work product. A drone operator testified that he had been ordered to track SEAL team movements during Operation Nightshade and transmit the data in real time to a civilian server. He had thought it was standard operational procedure. Only later did he learn the server belonged to Helix Defense. The evidence piled up. Documents, testimony, financial records, communication logs. A mountain of proof that the conspiracy was real, was deliberate, was criminal. But the defense fought back. They brought character witnesses who testified to Hale's exemplary service. They brought intelligence analysts who explained how chaotic and imperfect battlefield information could be. They brought a Navy psychologist who suggested that Lieutenant Ashford's trauma had caused her to construct a narrative that gave meaning to senseless tragedy. On the 6th day of testimony, Admiral Sterling Blackwell took the stand. He looked thinner than he had 3 months ago. The cancer was progressing, but his voice was strong, his bearing still commanding. He wore his dress whites with 4 rows of ribbons, and when he placed his hand on the Bible, there was not a tremor in it. Crane approached. Admiral Blackwell, what is your role in this investigation? I reopened the case into Operation Nightshade after Lieutenant Ashford showed me evidence that the mission had been compromised. Why did you believe her? Because I've spent 40 years in the Navy. I know what cover-ups look like. I know how good people get sacrificed to protect bad decisions. He paused. And because I looked into her eyes and saw the same thing I saw in the mirror for 28 years, after I lost 8 sailors in Desert Storm due to faulty intelligence. Guilt, rage, and the desperate need for someone to acknowledge that their deaths mattered. Did you find evidence to support Lieutenant Ashford's claims? Overwhelming evidence. The autopsy report showing Reed was dead 9 days before the mission. Financial records showing payments to Admiral Hale from Helix Defense. Communication logs proving that multiple officers knew the intelligence was compromised and authorized the mission anyway. Blackwell's voice hardened. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated decision to use American lives as collateral in a business transaction. The defense attorney stood. Objection. Characterization. Sustained. The witness will stick to facts. Blackwell nodded. The facts are these. 10 American service members died in missions connected to Project Coldwater over a 3-year period. In every case, the missions were based on questionable intelligence. In every case, Helix Defense surveillance assets were present. In every case, officers who authorized the missions received financial compensation from Helix or its subsidiaries. Those are the facts. You can draw your own conclusions. The cross-examination was aggressive. The defense attorney attacked Blackwell's credibility, suggested he was a bitter old man looking to tear down successful officers out of jealousy, pointed out that he had terminal cancer and might not be thinking clearly. Blackwell's response was calm and devastating. I have 6 to 8 months left to live, maybe less. I don't have time for pettiness or jealousy. What I have time for is the truth. And the truth is that Admiral Hale and his co-conspirators turned combat operations into profit centers. They got rich while good Americans died. And if exposing that cost me my reputation or my legacy, I'll pay that price gladly. On the 9th day, closing arguments began. The defense went first, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that mistakes had been made but not crimes, that Admiral Hale was being scapegoated for the inherent chaos of war. Then Crane stood for the prosecution's closing. She walked to the center of the room and spoke without notes. The defense wants you to believe this is complicated, that war is messy and mistakes happen, and we should give Admiral Hale the benefit of the doubt. But it's not complicated. It's actually very simple. She pointed to the evidence table. Agent Reed was killed on October 6th. His autopsy was completed on October 7th. That report was transmitted to Admiral Hale's office on October 14th at 1600 hours. At 2100 hours that same day, he authorized a mission to extract a man he knew was dead. That's not a mistake. That's not the fog of war. That's a crime. She walked to where Kira sat. Lieutenant Ashford and her team were lied to. They were told they were saving a life. Instead, they were bait in a trap designed to generate data for a weapons contractor that paid Admiral Hale $195,000. 3 Americans died. 3 families were destroyed. And for what? So Helix Defense could demonstrate their AI to potential buyers? Crane's voice rose. The defense says we're asking you to end a distinguished career over a mistake. But this wasn't Admiral Hale's career on trial. It's his character, his integrity, his fundamental fitness to wear the uniform. And the evidence shows that he sold that uniform. He sold his oath. He sold the lives of the men and women who trusted him to keep them safe. She returned to her seat. The defense is right about one thing. This is a tragedy. But the tragedy isn't that we're holding Admiral Hale accountable. The tragedy is that it took this long, that 10 people had to die before anyone asked questions. That Lieutenant Ashford had to carry shrapnel in her chest for 2 years before anyone listened. She looked at the panel of officers who would decide the verdict. You have the power to say this ends now, that we don't trade lives for profit, that the uniform means something, that honor isn't just a word we put on plaques. Do what's right, find him guilty, and make sure this never happens again. The deliberation took 14 hours. The tribunal panel consisted of 5 officers, ranging from captain to vice admiral. They reviewed evidence, debated testimony, and at 3 in the morning on August 28th, they reached a verdict. The courtroom reconvened at 0900. Every seat was filled. The energy was electric, nervous. Kira sat between Crane and Blackwell, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She had not slept. None of them had. Admiral Garrett entered. Everyone stood. He took his seat, opened a folder, and looked at Hale. The accused will rise. Hale stood. His face was pale but composed. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, this tribunal finds the accused guilty. A ripple went through the gallery. Hale's shoulders sagged slightly. On the charge of negligent homicide, this tribunal finds the accused guilty on 3 counts. Someone in the gallery let out a choked sob. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, this tribunal finds the accused guilty. Garrett closed the folder. Vincent Hale, you are hereby stripped of rank and discharged from the United States Navy with dishonor. You will be remanded to military custody pending sentencing. This tribunal recommends 18 years confinement at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Leavenworth, Kansas. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted. Kira sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, feeling the weight of 2 years lift from her chest. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Blackwell placed a hand on her shoulder. You did it. She opened her eyes. We did it. 3 months later, November 2019, the leaves on the trees around Walter Reed National Military Medical Center had turned gold and red and were beginning to fall. Inside, in a private room on the palliative care wing, Admiral Sterling Blackwell lay in a hospital bed that had been adjusted to help him breathe. The cancer had spread to his lymph nodes, his liver, his bones. The doctors said weeks, maybe days. Kira visited every afternoon. She would sit in the chair beside his bed and read to him, sometimes news articles about the ongoing investigations. 3 other officers had been charged in connection with Project Coldwater. Helix Defense had declared bankruptcy. Congress had passed the Ashford Whistleblower Protection Act. Sometimes she read novels, Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, the kind of spare, masculine prose that Blackwell appreciated. Today she brought photographs, pictures from a memorial service held at Arlington National Cemetery 3 days earlier. A new stone had been dedicated. 3 names carved in granite: Walsh, Foster, Merrick. The families came, Kira said, holding up a photo. Walsh's parents, Foster's fiancé, Merrick's mother. Her voice caught. Mrs. Merrick hugged me. She said, "Thank you for making sure Sloan didn't die for nothing." Blackwell's breathing was labored, but he managed a smile. "That's good. I put your medal there, the Navy Cross you earned in Desert Storm. I thought your sailors would want to meet mine. They're together now. That's how it should be." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. Finally, Blackwell spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you regret it? Speaking up?" Kira touched her ribs through her shirt. The shrapnel was aching today, cold front moving in. Every morning these hurt, but now they mean something, so no regrets. "Good." He closed his eyes. "Keep fighting. There are more like hail." "I know. I will. Promise me." "I promise." He died 2 days later, December 3rd, 2019, 03:47 in the morning. Kira was there, holding his hand. His last words were so quiet she almost missed them. "Tell them the truth mattered." The funeral was held at Arlington with full military honors. Thousands attended. The president sent a letter. The Secretary of Defense gave a speech about integrity and courage. But the eulogy that people remembered was delivered by Lieutenant Kira Ashford, medically retired, standing at the podium in her dress blues with a Navy Cross pinned over her heart. Admiral Blackwell had 8 months to live when he chose to fight for the truth. He could have spent that time with family, traveling, doing all the things dying men are supposed to do. Instead, he spent it giving me a voice, giving all of us a voice. She paused, looking out at the sea of uniforms. He taught me that courage isn't charging into battle. It's standing up when everyone tells you to sit down. It's choosing what's right over what's easy. It's spending your last breath making sure the next generation doesn't repeat your mistakes. She looked at the flag-draped coffin. "Admiral, you said you wanted to earn your legacy. You did, and we'll carry it forward." After the service, as the crowd dispersed, 14 active duty service members approached Kira. Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force. Each had a story, a suspicious mission, a buried report, a contractor relationship that didn't add up. A Marine captain spoke first. "Ma'am, we've been watching what you did, what you and the Admiral accomplished. We want to help. If you're still fighting, we want to fight with you." Kira looked at them. Young faces, old eyes, people who had seen things they couldn't unsee and knew things they couldn't unknow. People like her. "I'm still fighting," she said. 6 months later, June 2020, Kira stood in a small office in Alexandria, Virginia. The sign on the door read, "Operation Clearsight, Nonprofit, Veteran Advocacy, Military Contractor Oversight." The walls were covered with photographs. Her old team, Admiral Blackwell, the 14 who had approached her at the funeral, all of whom now volunteered. The Blackwell protocols had been implemented Pentagon-wide. Every mission involving contractor technology now required independent oversight. Every soldier tracking system had to be approved by a board that included combat veterans. The Ashford Whistleblower Protection Act protected service members who reported misconduct. 28 policy reforms had been implemented based on the investigations into Project Coldwater. Helix Defense was bankrupt, its executives facing criminal charges. 4 officers were in prison, and not a single service member had died in a covered-up mission since the story broke. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Walsh and Foster and Merrick were still dead. 8 other Americans killed in Somalia and Yemen were still dead. But it was something. Kira's phone rang. New case. Army sergeant reporting suspicious drone activity during a patrol in Syria. Intelligence that didn't match reality. A contractor nobody had heard of. She answered, "Ashford here, tell me everything." As she listened, taking notes, she felt the familiar ache in her ribs, the shrapnel shifting. Walsh, Foster, Merrick, always with her, always reminding her what silence cost, but reminding her, too, what speaking up could accomplish. Outside her office, traffic moved past. The world continued. People went to work, raised families, lived lives that never intersected with the dark corners where she operated. But in those dark corners, in the classified briefings, in the contractor meetings, in the mission planning rooms, people were starting to ask different questions, better questions, because one woman had refused to stay silent, because one admiral had spent his dying months fighting for truth, because sometimes the scars you carry become the weapons you wield. Kira finished the call and pulled up a case file on her computer. She had work to do, people to protect, lies to expose. The fight was not over. It would never be over. But she was ready. She touched her ribs one more time, feeling the 3 fragments that had tried to kill her and failed. Then she got to work. The scars beneath the metal would never heal, but they would never stop her either.